Alright, I'm going to show you how to disassemble the D4 S8 rear console. I believe this is also on the A8s as well. First, you're going to start by pulling up your rest there and then opening the cup holder. I've already started this, that's why things are sticking out right now. But what you're going to do is get a trim tool kind of like this. You're going to want one that's angled to help you get a little bit of leverage. Obviously, you want it to be plastic because you don't want to scratch any of these components. But what I did was I actually pushed this so that it was partially out of the way there. And then what you're going to do is get this tool in the edges of the front here. And you're going to pry back and forth and wiggle this whole assembly up. And when it pops up, what you're doing is you're actually pulling these metal clips out of their plastic recesses. Keep in mind there are two connectors, so be careful with those. So when you pull up, don't pull up too quickly. You're going to have to disconnect those connectors. After that, use your same trim tool. You can use either side to leverage this piece up, left, right, until you wiggle it out. It's just got two aluminum tabs that are sticking into just these steel clips here. And keep in mind you can't put this back on backwards because there's this little dowel here that's off center. So of course Audi thinks of everything. Then the next step I would do is remove this back piece here. What I did was I took the slightly angled edge and wiggled it in here and there and slowly worked its way up. And then followed along the whole edge. And you want to go very slow and careful and get the whole thing up evenly, because this one's pretty difficult because there's actually four clips and they're all in this aluminum structure. So it's pretty rigid. And then they're in plastic, but you just want to be careful because you don't want to break anything. And then once you've got those out, then same tool. This one's actually probably the most difficult because you really need two tools because this one's so stuck in there. But what you're going to do is the same thing. Start leveraging from all four corners. What I actually did was had one hand keeping upward pressure while my other hand was prying the four corners, and then I just wiggled and wiggled until it came up. And then there's one large connector. So the reason I'm taking this apart is it looks like the previous owner spilled something all over on the inside here. So the car is actually, surprisingly, it's smart enough to detect that there is an issue because the car is throwing a code. So if I put this back in here, you're going to notice here this button, I can barely press it. It doesn't return or slowly returns. I don't know if it's that button in particular, but it's throwing a code for the rear control system. But yeah, I'm going to clean this all apart and then get the cup holder out as well and clean that apart. If you want to take out your cup holder, you have to undo the three screws that were here. I already took them out. They look like this. They're Torx 25. And the reason you have to do that is because on the cup holder there is this front piece of plastic, and that is in the way of this assembly because there's this little clip right where my finger is here, and then there's another clip over here. Basically, I'm going to back up here. This whole assembly covers that front edge. So you have to pull those three screws out in order to get the cup holder out, but it's not going to come out immediately because there is a tab there and there. So two tabs that you have to push in on. I'm just going to use a small flathead screwdriver. I just pushed in on the tabs, and so now you're going to see this whole assembly slides forward. And of course I've got some lovely treats in there. Also I've got some really lovely nastiness all the way down in there too. So yeah, someone definitely filled this thing full of sludge. So I'm gonna clean this out and then see if I can take these apart and clean them out. Alright, we're gonna take this assembly apart. So I already took it apart. Just want to show you how to do it. You're gonna have 5 of these small fasteners. I used a very long Torx 8. I mean, it doesn't have to be that long, but it has to be long enough to clear this ridge. So there's one here, there, at the corner here, corner there, and then keep in mind there's one also underneath this label here. It's not a tamper label, so you can just roll the label up. But then once you do that, this just comes right off. It's just held on by the fasteners. Next thing I did was very gently pry these connectors off. So the white part is separate from this more cream colored connector. You pry those two up, and then once you've done that, you can pop this board out. So this board is what actually has all of the buttons, LEDs, everything on it. I want to make a note here that you can also use this disassembly to get dust out from behind this panel here. Because this is sealed, sometimes you can get dust between there and the actual LCD. In my case, mine's actually pretty clean. But I did have some residue on the board. I was able to wipe it off, and it didn't cause any issues there, thank goodness. However, I did have to get to the buttons because they were completely stuck. So what I did was you kind of roll these connectors forward, and then what you're going to do is get a small screwdriver. So I actually got just a small Craftsman here, and what you're going to do is you're going to look for basically this tab here and that tab there. Then it also somewhat gets stuck in the middle, but if you wiggle it enough, this will just pop out. And keep in mind, when you do this, you need to be very careful. Pop it out slowly. And honestly, I would say when you pop it out upside down, because what happens is when this comes up, you have a bunch of these elevated, basically pieces of plastic that springs sit on. And these small springs here are what actually provide the spring force for the buttons. And they actually the springs sit inside of these circular channels that each button is pushed up by. So, as you can see here, I'm just going to actuate this button from behind. Before, I already cleaned this up, but before this was completely stuck, so I was not able to just do this. So you know your buttons are good when you can take this from behind and just push up on it and have it, pop back down and not get stuck. Keep in mind on some vehicles there's different options, so there's not going to be any springs for the components that are just blocked off here. In order to get the buttons off here, easiest thing to do is just get a small screwdriver like this, push force down on the button, and there is a very small tab right there, and then there's also one on the other side. So there's 2 tabs per button. They're all kind of offset, but what you can do is just bend this tab in. You can see how I'm bending that in there, and then when I do that, the button will just pop out the top of the housing. If you do want to take the chrome trim off of this assembly, it actually comes off from the bottom. As you can see, there's all these tabs that are resting on the black plastic here. Keep in mind, if you do this though, this is adhered on. It's going to be hard to film here, but right in there you're going to see a shiny bead of kind of plastic, rubber, whatever. There's some more there. Let me just get the screwdriver and point that out. Little bead of rubber there, a little bit there. And they kind of just put it all around the corners as well. I'm not sure why they did that. It's probably just to keep it evenly flush and it doesn't creak or anything like that, I'm guessing. Audi is usually pretty particular about creaks, so you can push this and it doesn't creak or anything like that. So I'm guessing that's why. But that is how you disassemble this one. And then obviously assembly is reverse of how we disassembled it. This is what the springs look like on the assembly here. So obviously I don't have the option button on the top here. So you're not going to put any springs there. It doesn't even come with springs on it. So when you put this on, you're going to drop this in and make sure those springs actually go into the circular grooves that they're supposed to. So before the buttons were mushy, and now, as you can hear, nice and clicky. Perfect. Alright, so basically same as the other side. You're going to have to pull some Torx 8s out of here, here, there. Then there's two groups of two groups of two. When you do that, you're gonna have to undo this label here, and then this will pop off. After you've done that, you're gonna have to unplug this guy. You need to be very careful. These are very small wires and very delicate. You're going to then flip this whole assembly over. I'm gonna set the camera down for a second. So once the assembly is flipped over, you're gonna have to pull up on these connectors. They just pop off. Pop them both off. And then at that point, you can actually undo this whole assembly of the outer ridge. And then these two will actually come out. Now the two side ones will, because the button was really the only thing that was holding them on. This one's a little bit trickier because you have to undo the connector. Once you do that, then this whole assembly will pop up. It's a little bit friction fit because the audio jack right there is actually pressed in there. Now, getting these assemblies apart, you have a cover, so you can see these whitish tabs here. Each of these buttons is actually clipped onto a second assembly here that is sliding on another, basically another piece of plastic. And then the spring mechanism is actually coming from a stainless stamped piece here. You can see has all these little spring tabs. So each button is moving one of those tabs up and down. So if you do get, any sticky mess in these buttons, you can pull these off. What I would do is actually pull these tabs up. You need to be very careful. There's actually tabs on the inside too. So see at the end of my finger there, you can see a tiny speck of white. There's actually a tab on the back side as well. So there's actually 4 tabs on just this button right here. There's one there, one there, one there, and then you're going to see one in the recesses there where my finger just was. So each of these has about 4. They're all in slightly different spots for each button. So be careful when you pull those off. But what you can actually do is pull all this off, because that has soft touch, and soft touch is not very resistant to cleaning. But after you pull those covers off, you can actually wash the rest of this, because the rest of this is made out of PCABS, which is pretty high temperature resistance. It's around, like 120C. I wouldn't get it close to that, but what you can do is actually run it under hot water, and that'll dissolve most messes, and then just get an air gun and blow everything off. Obviously be careful not to leave water on the stainless here, because it could corrode, but that would be a very quick way to clean it up, and that's actually what I just did on this assembly here. Like I showed you earlier, these were actually sticking. What I did was I just pulled all of these top covers off, which these were a little bit trickier because these silver buttons are actually overlapping the other buttons. So you have to start by taking off all the black buttons first, and then you have to take off this center button here as well before you can get to the 4 silvers and the center one. So those ones are a little bit trickier to get to. To get this center button out, I'll give you some hints. So you start here, there's one clip there, and then there's one more clip, but you're going to need something like a very small flathead or similar, but right down in there you can see there's a slight step. What you're going to do is put this in there and push this direction, and what that will do is pop that back clip out, and then you can just pull this whole thing up, and then at that point you'll uncover these 4 buttons so you can get these out. These top 2 buttons are really tricky because I had a really hard time getting them off because their clip is right here on this ridge. And of course, the secondary assembly that slides doesn't allow that to happen. So let me show you how you can do that. Alright, so I just popped the button off like I told you. There's just two clips, really easy. You just push usually I start with the front one here, and then when you slide the screwdriver in the back bottom like I showed you, you just push on it and it pops right up, really easy. That first button here was just 3 clips, so there's one there, there, and there. The trickiest one to get to is this back end one, and I'd say it'd be really good for you to have something like this, a pick set that has an angled one. This 45-degree one has been the most useful for me, just because it's easier to get to these more tricky tabs. So I'm going to slide this down and show you there is actually a tab right there. And it's really hard to get to because this secondary kind of button mechanism is in the way. So the only way I could figure out how to get these two further buttons out was to actually take this assembly that I'm sliding up and down off. And the way that I did that was I took a screwdriver, this small screwdriver here, and I just applied a little bit of upward pressure on the sliding mechanism. And while I was doing that, I took a straight pick, and I'm going to show you here, right where my pick is, there's a tab there, and then there's a tab there, and there. Most of these buttons have about 3 tabs. Some of them have 2 if they're a little bit smaller. So what you have to do is you actually have to come in here. I'll show you just as an example, but while I was applying upward force, see how I'm bending that housing a little bit? What you're going to do is apply upward force on the button and bend the housing so that those tabs can unclip and slide up towards you. Now obviously you have to do that on all 3, so this one's tricky because if you're not providing upward force, they're never going to stay out. So you want to make sure you keep applying force, pop up, and then you're good to go. Forgot to mention also here you can pull these out by just pushing them up from the bottom and then pulling them up like that. And then when you're done putting things back together, you just push them back in like that. And they're all pretty self-explanatory. They're shaped the way that the lights pop through the buttons. So here they are, both restored. All the buttons click and return as expected. So obviously before they were very bad. It'll be nice to have these working again. A quick tip, if you have really dirty buttons here, which these ones were all filthy, whoever was partying in the back obviously had a little bit too much to drink because they covered these things. So you can just put a little bit of water on a toothbrush and then just scrub this out. Obviously, don't put too much water on the toothbrush. You don't want to get water into the assembly. And like I showed you earlier, you can pull these 2 smaller ones out. This one comes out as an assembly, so you could just be very careful with just a little bit of water, and you can clean it up so it's good as new.